Hey, what's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about sugar versus saturated fat because I feel like there is a lot of misinformation about saturated fat and I want to help you understand what is actually going on, and so we're going to use some common sense when it comes to figuring out what is bad for us and what isn't, just from what we see in society in general. And over the years, sugar consumption has been going up while consumption of saturated fats have been going down. And a very interesting point to make with this is that chronic disease has been going up. So that looks like any type of chronic disease, such as heart disease, which is the #1 killer, cancers, diabetes, Alzheimer's. All of these chronic diseases are increasing, and it doesn't make sense to blame saturated fat for that or demonize it because of that, because the only thing that has increased along with those chronic diseases is our increased consumption of sugar. So by just simple deductive reasoning, we can say that increase in sugar consumption or overconsumption of sugar leads to an increase in chronic disease. And I'm going to break down just a few key points. Now, these are my personal opinions. Obviously, there's a lot of data out there that talks about how sugar is related to these chronic diseases. But I want to tell you about my clinical experience, what I've seen with my patients, how we get phenomenal results with them. Because you can do studies, and obviously there are so many different factors that come with that. And I'm not saying that research isn't valid. I'm just saying that when you're talking about your day-to-day patients and everybody's unique situation and their biochemical individuality, then there are a lot more factors that go into it other than just the general population. And that's where I think that just generalizations really fall short. And so we need to dive into specifics. So, and now this is just what I've seen. I've seen that the increase of consumption of sugar with a parallel in increase of chronic disease, and then everybody's saying that saturated fat causes heart disease and strokes and heart attacks and embolisms and all these other things, when we don't see that correlating with saturated fats. Now, there are other types of fats which I want to talk about later, such as trans fats, which are more correlated and more detrimental to your health, but saturated fats, I'm going to argue today, are not. And so with an increase in sugar, diabetes is one of the biggest issues. Now, we see diabetic neuropathies here in the clinic. We see gut health issues. We see metabolic issues, especially when it comes to weight loss. And what we know and why this is so important, and I think this is something that is becoming more prevalent, just what we see in our patients with diabetes, is that they develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And so when you have overconsumption of sugar and your body can't process it, it can't burn it as energy, then what happens, it goes to the liver and it stores it as fat. And this leads to fat accumulation around the liver. And that's why people who end up with fatty liver that don't drink excessive amounts of alcohol, we see a very high correlation between them and diabetics, and that's because of that sugar that they're consuming too much. And it doesn't matter what type of sugar it is. It can be, glucose or fructose. So that means like even your fruits. And one thing about fruits is that if you're eating the fiber of the fruits, then a lot of the times you're not going to have the blood sugar spikes that you would if you were just drinking like a juice, like an orange juice or apple juice or something like that. So that's very important when you're talking about that. Not all fructose is bad. And so when we look at heart disease, which has been touted to be caused by saturated fat, we see that heart disease is on the rise, even though more people are consuming less of it. So we can't really say that this makes sense, because if it was correlated to saturated fats and the overall consumption of saturated fats is going down, then that doesn't make sense from a scientific standpoint. And so Saturated fats are mainly found in meats, butters, and cheeses. While I don't recommend that you eat dairy if you're in the United States because it is more processed and has a lot more chemicals and antibiotics in it that lead to what we see all the time are lactose intolerances and issues with dairy. Now, if you go overseas, that's a very different story, and I've heard many patients who travel overseas and they eat, dairy and butter and bread, and they have no issues. But when they come back to the States, these start to increase. And one of the famous diets back in, I believe it was the 90s, was the Atkins diet, which was, a very heavy meat-based diet, and it had a lot of saturated fats, and he had great success with it. I just don't think that it's good over the long term. Obviously, a more Mediterranean diet is what you want to do for longevity and stability. But when it comes to correcting metabolic issues, I think that it can be a very good tool in the short term. And so most of the time when I'm working with patients, if they're very severe, we do a carnivore diet, then we transition to keto and intermittent fasting, and then we go to like a Mediterranean and intermittent fasting program. So there are different stages for different people, but that's just what I like to do. And the places that we find sugar mostly, and they're hidden, you don't realize how much sugar you're consuming, are in the candies, cookies, cakes, even your pastas. Some of those white breads have, a very sharp glucose index, and they spike your blood sugars. And white bread is one of the highest on the charts. So any type of those, even though you may not be consuming these things, you may still be getting it from other sources that contain the sugars just in a more of a complex form that your body breaks down. And now while saturated fat is mainly found in your meat, butter, and cheeses, there are some plants that contain saturated fat, and this looks like mainly coconut oil. And I don't think there's many people out there that argue that coconut oil is bad for you. I know a lot of people that use it in their hair or their skin in order to, reduce inflammation and to give it a nice glow. And even adding this into your diet, they show that medium chain triglycerides help with any type of gut issues, leaky gut, help to seal that leaky gut up so that you can get some digestive benefit from it as well. Another thing with sugar, especially if you struggle with chronic fatigue or any type of energy issues, is that one thing that is kind of not necessarily correct is that after you eat tryptophan and turkey, then you get, it causes you to fall asleep. But that's not the case. Most of the time, what's causing that post-Thanksgiving dinner fatigue is that we spike our blood sugars with like sweet potato casserole or cranberry sauce or whatever it may be, and that rebound of the insulin response to bring the blood sugar down is what causes us to crash. So we don't really have energy sustainability with the sugars. Now, this is very different if you're an athlete and you're being very active and exercising, for 30 to 90 minutes a day. But if you're somebody who maybe you're retired or a little bit older, or maybe you're not that active, maybe you're doing like the bare minimum that I suggest is 3 times a week for 30 minutes, just walking or doing HIIT training, then that doesn't apply to you. Like, you definitely want to avoid these and avoid that energy roller coaster. But when we look at saturated fat, then we see more of a stable energy and a long-term energy. And this is why keto works so well, is because you're getting those a slow release of energy over time, rather than the sharp increase in blood sugar with an insulin response that crashes that blood sugar down so you don't have any energy. And now, like I said, while there are some people who promote the keto long term, I am not one of those. I think the keto diet should be used in the short term for any type of weight loss goals. You can use it intermittently, but sometimes I see people get very severe headaches and they end up having more energy issues if they're not guided correctly. So be very careful with that, because you have to be very careful about your electrolytes and your mineral balances, because if you're not getting those from your diet, then you can definitely have issues later on. So I just wanted to kind of debunk this, give you my opinion. Remember, this is my opinion and what I have seen from a clinical standpoint, but also what I've read and understand about it. So I hope you found this video helpful. Please like this if you found it helpful. Share it with your friends and family, because I did have one patient who didn't understand this. He was a diabetic and thought fats were bad for you, and that's probably why he has diabetes up until now. But once we kind of helped him understood that fats aren't necessarily bad, and then how to control the diabetes, he's doing a lot better. So again, subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Any video suggestions that you have, I definitely am open to that. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye.